I believe that good intelligence means you have to be brutally honest, and you have to tell people where they really stand, and you have to create opportunities for solving problems. War should be a last resort if everything else fails. And in my case, Iraq was my country and my back channel, and we had already put together a superior platform that would resolve everything. And this would have been, monitored by the CIA and the FBI. Every objective that we could think to do, we'd already achieved. Every objective declared by the United States had already been won. You did not have to kill a single Iraqi child or blow up a single building in Baghdad or Basra to have everything you could possibly dream of. The economic condition of this world would have been a totally different thing, because all the countries would have been able to go into Iraq in peacetime and help rebuild the country. And they all would have been able to feed off the spoils of the oil industry in helping to rebuild the oil industry. And everyone would have profited. It would have been a very productive situation for the global economy. And here instead you see what has happened in a war situation where the oil infrastructure is destroyed. The schools and education and literacy are destroyed. Healthcare is destroyed. The Iraqi exiles have inherited the society that they created. They destroyed Iraq with sanctions, and now they have to go in and try to manage the situation, and they are failures as leaders.
And you write that, quote, almost immediately my arrest began to expose the dilemma for defendants on the Patriot Act. How is that?
Yes, I was arrested on the Patriot Act, and I had a great defense, and I wanted to go into trial and prove myself in a court of law. I was hit with secret charges. Now think of the image of the United States as I tell you this. Remember, this is the United States of America that positions itself as the great defender of human rights around the world and the great defender of liberty around the world. And under the Patriot Act, the whole system of social order is overturned. Anyone who opposes the government, who speaks against the government, can be subject to surveillance. And it is phone surveillance, internet surveillance, roving wiretaps, which means that if you're coming after me and I have lunch with a friend, the FBI has the right to turn its surveillance onto my friend, even if my friend hasn't done anything wrong. They can capture all this, they can turn surveillance on every single person that I have contact with. And there's a misconception that it only applies to terrorism and it only applies to foreigners. That is not true. It applies to all political dissidents. If you speak out about the environment or against the death penalty or in my own state of Maryland, they went after environmental activists and anti-war activists. But here's what happens on the Patriot Act. I was hit with secret charges, secret evidence, secret grand jury testimony. I was not allowed to know who had accused me of what crimes, what date the events allegedly occurred on, what laws I allegedly broke. I was told nothing. I was just said, they just said to me, you are an Iraqi agent. And that's all. And I said, well, what does that mean? I'm an Iraqi agent. What are you talking about? That's silly. And they were like, well, we don't have to tell you anything. And they said, in the month of October, some unspecified action occurred. Well, it turns out that in the month of October, for example, I received an English translation of a book on depleted uranium. The act of receiving the book under the Patriot Act was a felony offense that should get me 5 years in prison. Okay? Now, the total charges altogether accumulated to 25 years in prison. Okay? 25 years in prison without having the right to know what I had allegedly done or who was accusing me.
You have spent a lot of time covering Libya as well. What's the story with Libya right now? Is Gaddafi going to leave?
Gaddafi will never leave Libya. Libya is a tragedy. There is no justification for this war at all. It is obviously about oil. We know that last summer, Gaddafi began demanding that oil companies should provide compensation to the Libyan people for the sanctions that were imposed by the United Nations. And the sanctions were imposed because of the Lockerbie bombing, which it turns out Libya had nothing to do with. Libya was never involved in the Lockerbie attack. The world discovered that the United States paid witnesses $4 million apiece to testify against Libya. And even then, the case against Libya was so weak that one of the men was acquitted immediately, and the other one was, Megrahi received a life sentence. But the British government, 2 years ago, when it came to light that these witnesses had been bribed by the United States government, Megrahi was released from prison. And so Gaddafi had now, once he got his man home, Gaddafi began pressuring the oil companies to provide some sort of compensation to Libya for what he had suffered under the United Nations sanctions. And if you realize that the United Nations had done to Libya what they did to Iraq, it was like the weapons inspections. Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction to hand over to the United Nations, and Libya had no ties to the Lockerbie attack. But they were both subjected to these hellacious sanctions. The Iraqis suffered 2 million deaths, and the destruction of literacy, hospital care. The whole society was torn to pieces because of these horrible United Nations sanctions. And the United Nations built a bureaucracy for itself of 6-figure salaries here in New York City, where the bureaucrats were paid a fortune to manage Iraq's oil wealth, and the people starved and died while the UN fat cats got very wealthy. And the same thing happened to Libya, except Libya and Gaddafi's a pretty tough guy, pretty crafty guy. And he began to try to get the oil companies to provide kickbacks for the Libyan people. For myself, I have no regrets for what I paid to support my values. I stood up for what I love. My work gave me the greatest sense of personal satisfaction, adventures, and achievement that I could have hoped for. Knowing the consequences, I would change nothing even if I could. These days, I'm a free agent for peace and nonviolence. I still live in Tacoma Park doing animal rescue work with my little family of dachshunds and kitty cats. My Japanese weeping cherry tree, planted the week of my arrest, still grows in my front yard, serene and undisturbed by the tumultuous times of our world. Each spring, my peace tree blossoms in white petals again, and though all of us working together failed to stop this tragic war in Iraq, in my heart I am content to know that all of us tried so hard together. As Odysseus Elitis wrote about the fight against fascism in Greece, let them stone us, let them say that we walked with our heads in the clouds. Those who have never felt, my friend, with what stone, what blood, what iron, what fire, we build, dream, and sing.
You know, after 5 years of indictment without a conviction or a guilty plea, you're free. Now, as we sit and have this conversation, why did you decide to write your book? And were you not worried?
My book is titled Extreme Prejudice, the terrifying story of the Patriot Act and the cover-ups of 9/11 in Iraq. Extreme prejudice is the intelligence vernacular for assassination. So in a very real sense, I feel that they've already assassinated me. They've already tried to kill me off, and I have survived. And now it's important for the whole world to know what they were hiding, because the whole war on terrorism is a terrible fraud. The United States did 9/11 to itself. We allowed that attack to occur. That's very offensive. And we know that Israel was the one pushing for this war in Iraq because they wanted to take out Saddam as their enemy. The United States had no grievance with Iraq. Iraq wanted to be the best friend to the United States. They looked back to the glory days before the first Gulf War.
You say best friend, others might say the puppet.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
Yes.
So,
but Saddam wanted to go back to that relationship. The United States could have had so much wealth. They were willing to give the United States so much that it would just make you sick, heartsick, to know how unnecessary this war was.
that's all the time we have for this edition of The Autograph here on Press TV. Thank you for staying with us and watching. As always, you can send us your emails to The Autograph at SusanWithIris.com. We're always looking forward to them. Until next week in another show, from all of us here in New York City, goodbye.